The old house on the edge of town stood silent, wrapped in the weight of memories. Its heavy curtains were always drawn, its wooden floors always polished, as though the family who lived there wanted to preserve not just the rooms, but the very air of the past. Inside those walls, time moved slowly, and shadows clung to the corners as if they had secrets of their own. The family portrait still hung above the fireplace. It showed a stern woman in black, her face pale and unsmiling, with 3 younger figures at her side. 2 young women, almost identical, sat in front, their dark dresses trimmed with white lace, while a young man stood stiffly beside them, his hands resting at his sides. The portrait had been painted to project unity, but anyone who looked closely could feel the tension between their eyes, as if the truth had been hidden behind the careful pose. This was the family's legacy. Wealth, appearances, and silence. The story begins, as many stories do, with hope that Clara, the younger daughter, had fallen in love. She was gentle, thoughtful, with a kind of softness that made people trust her. When Edward, a young man from a respected family, began calling at the house, it was clear his attentions were meant for her. His visits grew more frequent, their walks through the garden longer, and soon whispers of an engagement began to fill the halls. Clara glowed in those months, her smile lighter, her steps quicker, as though her heart had finally found something that belonged only to her. Her sister Margaret watched with quiet patience. She had always been more serious, more careful with her feelings. Though the 2 sisters looked alike, Margaret carried herself with a sharper edge, a strength that Clara lacked. She congratulated her sister, kissed her cheek, and said she was happy for her. And perhaps she was. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of something unspoken, that Clara never noticed. It was not Margaret who changed the course of their lives. It was their mother. Mrs. Whitfield had been widowed young, and she carried that weight with a rigid dignity. She wore black not just for mourning, but as if it were her armor, a constant reminder of what she had lost. She demanded respect, obedience, and above all, control. To the outside world, she was a figure of strength. To her children, she was a figure to be feared as much as loved. At first, she seemed pleased with Clara's engagement. Edward was well-mannered, attentive, and from a good family. But as weeks turned to months, something shifted. The mother began to linger in the room when Edward visited. She asked him questions that had nothing to do with Clara, about his work, his ambitions, his ideas of the world. She laughed at his remarks, her eyes lighting in a way her children had not seen in years. And slowly, Edward's gaze began to linger back. Clara, innocent and trusting, did not see it. She believed in love, believed in loyalty. She dreamed of a wedding day, of children, of a life built beside Edward. But Margaret noticed. She saw the way her mother's hand brushed Edward's arm a little too often, the way Edward leaned closer when her mother spoke. She said nothing, holding the secret like a stone in her chest. Heavy and cold. One evening, the truth broke through. Clara had been waiting for Edward in the garden, the lanterns glowing softly against the night. She wandered near the drawing-room window and stopped. Inside, she saw her mother and her fiancé sitting close, too close. Her mother's hand rested on Edward's, and his face was turned toward hers with an expression Clara had thought belonged only to her. The laughter, the softness, it was theirs. And in that moment, something inside Clara fractured. She did not cry out. She did not rush in. She stood there, frozen, while the lantern light flickered and the sound of their quiet voices drifted through the glass. When Edward finally came to her that night, his words stumbled. He spoke of confusion, of feelings he had not expected. He said he admired Clara deeply, but that something had changed, that her mother had awakened something he could not deny. He asked her to understand. Clara listened in silence, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She felt the world tilt beneath her, as though the ground she had trusted her whole life had given way. The engagement was broken within a week. Edward continued to visit the house, but not for Clara. The whispers in town began almost immediately. Some said Edward had been trapped by the mother's manipulations, others that he had willingly chosen passion over duty. Clara withdrew into herself, her once bright eyes dulled by betrayal. Margaret stayed near her, a quiet guardian, though she too bore the weight of shame. Dot and Mrs. Whitfield? She held her head high. She spoke of love as if it excused the wound she had dealt her own child. She claimed that the heart could not be commanded, that she too deserved happiness, even if it came at a cruel price. The scandal never truly left them. The house grew quieter, colder. Clara never married, her trust and love broken beyond repair. Margaret carried on, steady and strong, though her resentment toward her mother lingered like an unspoken shadow. Edward remained with Mrs. Whitfield for a time, but as the years passed, his visits grew less frequent. Whatever passion had drawn him to her began to fade, leaving only regret behind. Dot in the end, Mrs. Whitfield found herself alone again, sitting in the parlor with the heavy curtains drawn, staring at the portrait above the fireplace. The faces in that painting looked back at her, frozen in time, but she could feel the distance in their eyes. She had wanted love, perhaps even redemption. Instead, she had carved a wound into her family that would never heal. Clara, with her quiet sadness, found peace in solitude. She tended the garden, read her books, and learned to live with the silence of what had been stolen. Margaret remained by her side, protective as ever, her own life shaped by loyalty and sacrifice. The two sisters, though scarred, endured. The mother's legacy, however, was not strength nor love. It was betrayal. And that betrayal echoed in every corner of the house, in every creak of the floorboards, in every shadow that stretched across the parlor. For those who saw the portrait, the story remained hidden. They saw only a family, dressed in black, their faces solemn and composed. But for those who knew, the painting told a different tale, a tale of desire, of loss, and of a mother who stole her own daughter's fiancé. And perhaps the most haunting part of the story is not the scandal itself, but the silence that followed. The silence of a daughter who could not speak her grief, a sister who swallowed her anger, and a mother who never admitted her sin. Time carried them all forward, as it always does. But within the walls of that old house, the air remained heavy, as though it remembered what the world wished to forget. And even now, long after their footsteps have faded, the story lingers slow, quiet, and unrelenting. A family torn not by fate, but by choice. A love claimed where it never should have been. And the sorrow of a daughter whose happiness was taken by the one person who should have protected it most. That is the story. And it is as disturbing now as it was then.